It's Sunday in the Breakfast Club, so it is indeed time for some serious talk, and I am Serious Mind. Kazoom did a fantastic video on Saturday. It was a short video, it was only 18 seconds, but in that video, even though it was short, he spoke volumes, and he really kind of captured really the great trouble of our age. And things have gotten worse over the last decade or more. We've reached a level of partisanship and disjointedness that we really are all in these camps, and we stare at each other and hate at each other, and we don't care about one another anymore. And I've talked the last few weeks about bigotry, and both the conscious and unconscious kind, and how bigotry is not limited to any one group of people, and it could be aimed at anybody by anybody. And unfortunately, there's people in the audience that, of course, were so fractured is that instead of listening to what I actually said, they kind of see it through the lens of whatever their preconceived notions are, which is a little unfortunate, but so be it. One of the things that happens, and this is another part of an after effect of bigotry, is that anytime anyone does something, if they're part of any group, whether it's an ethnic group, a racial group, a culture group, a religious group, whatever, political group, we have this tendency to apply that bad act and as indicative of the group, and why we do that. Of course, we're trying to show how our group is superior and their group is inferior, whether in deed, action, word, whatever. And so we use these as, we have this cognitive biases, we have this confirmation bias. So we say, see, there's the example that group is morally bankrupt or whatever, and we lambast them. And of course, as I said before, this is just our own bigotry speaking when we do this. As I said, bigotry is not tied to any one group. Anybody can be a bigot. Now, and so what we end up happening is we always hear people complain to say, well, if that whole group isn't like that, then how come there aren't people from that group speaking out about it? And the counter to that is always that, well, we ought not to hold people accountable for actions that they didn't commit, and that's true. We shouldn't look at a whole group as a monolith and then accuse them of being guilty for what some members of their group did. But unfortunately, the fact is we do. It doesn't matter how much we shouldn't. It's kind of human nature, unfortunately. And again, as we get more and more polarized, it gets worse. And now, I don't remember, it's been a while, but Rith Rando, Unseen Perfidy, he went by various names, did a good video talking about exactly that, about how, we unfairly, in his video, I think he was talking about the way atheists often go after Christians and try to hold them accountable for things that other Christians did, as a sign that all Christianity is bankrupt, as opposed to looking at the actions of the individual we're talking to. And now Rob took the position that, well, if you're going to hold them accountable, then you have to hold us accountable for what atheists do, and so forth and so on. And the interesting thing is, I agree with him, but there is, I guess I'd say from the other perspective, as I think we all should be accountable. All of us, not just for the groups we belong to, but for everybody. Whenever we see an injustice, we should speak out about it. Because if we don't, then that's kind of our tacit complicity, well, in one way or another. Now, I do think if you're part of a group, and if people within your group are doing bad things, and I don't think you have a special obligation per se, but I do think it behooves you to speak out, because it's not, even though it's not fair that people will lump you in with them, you do have some ability at least to try to mitigate it. So it's in your benefit to do so. You don't owe anybody that. People shouldn't hold it against you if you don't. but it's smart to do it. And so in that light, I'm going here to do some rebuking of my own. And specifically, I'm looking at the four, I don't know if they were teens, but the four young black people who attacked a white special needs student out in Chicago. And they had the audacity to put this on Facebook. And they did it live. Here's some wonderful people. So now some of the critics of the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to pin this on Black Lives Matter. Whether or not that's fair, I don't know, but I don't care. I guess what I'm going to say is whether they thought they were doing this as part of their Black Lives Matter activism or not, what they did was 100% wrong. No amount of injustice justifies attacking an unarmed, innocent person, whether they're special needs or not. So the people that, thankfully, they've been caught, and it looks like they're going to face justice, and that's excellent. But the thing that bothers me even, maybe not more, but maybe as much, there are people now scrambling to try to say that, well, this wasn't a hate crime or it wasn't racism because blah, blah, blah. And as I said in my videos the past 2 weeks, I do not accept the notion that only white people can be bigoted or be racist. That's bullshit. Anybody can be racist. If you attack somebody because of their race, ethnicity, national origin, then at a certain point, whether or not you are a racist, remember we talked about that, you don't have to be a racist to commit a racist act. However, I think when you graduate to violence against someone because of their racial background or ethnic or national origin, then I think that you've pretty much crossed that line. And I reject that kind of racism and that kind of violence, all because you don't like somebody. And meanwhile, obviously, in this case, the poor kid, I doubt had anything at all to do with anything that they were on about. So that just, compounds their crime. It's not that it would be justifiable otherwise. It just makes it worse. So I would say this, as someone who wants justice for not only for unarmed black people who have been mistreated by the cops, but for poor white people who have been mistreated by the cops and everybody else who's been mistreated by the cops. If you think that beating up somebody on the street is a way to get justice, you are wrong, and that is an evil act, and you are a racist, and you need to cease and desist. I don't care, even if that person was an officer, and even if that was an officer who had committed acts of violence against citizens, it still would be wrong. So I reject you and I rebuke you, and I hope that everybody will reject you and rebuke you. And if people think you're part of some movement, I hope everybody in that movement rejects you and rebukes you and says that you are not, your type of action is not wanted, warranted, or welcome. And I hope you are prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Because, thinking about what Kazum said, people have gotten so political that, they value their politics over human life. Well, I think that he's right, that's what people are doing, and I will have no part of it. And I hope people will take this opportunity to see, where we're headed, and kind of reverse direction. And let's stand up and let's rebuke these people instead of trying to jump through hoops and twist oneself around in all sorts of convoluted logic to make some excuse how, well, okay, it was wrong, but it wasn't racism. Who cares? I think actually it was racism, and we should recognize it for what it is and not try to maintain some bullshit narrative, and just be humans and recognize that, hey, this is wrong. It's always wrong. And there's no justification for it. Rebuke it, reject it, and accept it. But what we want to do, it seems that we don't want our side to have a black eye. So instead we'll come up with some bullshit excuses as to why it wasn't what we all know it was. So please stop it.